Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We have some really special guests here today and speakers, and we're very excited to have you all. Thanks, everyone, for being here. Today, we're going to be focused on talking about data and data-driven recruiting and really how to turn using metrics into career momentum and what are some best tips and practices from our amazing speakers here today. So as everyone's getting settled, you can feel free to put your name, where you're calling from, and your LinkedIn profile in the chat if you'd like. We always love to use these opportunities to network and make connections with fellow TA practitioners and leaders. And we would also love to hear your questions as you have them. So if you're having questions, follow-up questions for our panelists as you hear everything that they're saying, please feel free to put those in the chat and we'll try to keep an eye on those and incorporate them when it makes sense. We can also leave some to the end if it seems to make sense to answer those at the end as well. So again, welcome. And for those of you who don't know what Talent Collective is, well, first of all, my name is Krista Tan, and I'm one of the co-founders of Talent Collective. We are a community for women in the recruiting space. So we host amazing opportunities and speaking sessions just like this. But we also have 18 different locations around the US and Canada where we have in-person events and experiences. Katie, one of our panelists here, leads our Austin location. We also have a ton of great networking and mentoring opportunities for our members. So if you're interested, you can always reach out to me and learn more. But really would love to focus today on our panelists and hear from them. So first of all, just wanted to say a huge thank you to Tom. Tom is the CEO of Pinpoint ATS. And has helped sponsor this session today. And then we also have two other amazing speakers today, Sam from Compass Business Solutions and Katie from Pi Insurance. So without further ado, we'd love to pass it over to you three to do some intros on yourself. So I'd love to hear a little bit about just your background and experience, and then also a little bit more about your company. So Tom, would you like to kick us off?
Sure. Thanks, Krista. And yeah, thanks for having me, everybody. Appreciate this, Aria. Yeah, I'm Tom. I'm the founder and CEO at Pinpoint. We're an ATS. As was outlined, we kind of focus on both the US and the UK markets. Our teams and our customer base is split roughly half and half between those. We work with mid-market and enterprise businesses, and sort of super proud of the work and the product and the sort of advice we're able to take to market as a result of some of the data and kind of insights we can gather by looking at all of the stuff our customers are doing. My background is probably slightly less interesting than everybody else's. I'm like a complete nerd, and this is my fourth software business. My first three had nothing to do with recruitment, and I kind of quickly realized that until I learned how to recruit properly and kind of get the right people on the right place at the right time, everything else I was doing is a waste of time. So sort of felt really passionate about taking my kind of geeky software skills and bringing them to this space.
Well, you're a very smart person for realizing how important talent acquisition is. So thank you for what you're doing. All right, Sam, would love to pass it to you now.
Thanks, Krista. Hello, everybody. My name is Sam Bussard. I am the Chief Talent Officer here at Compass Business Solutions. I'll talk about Compass first. Compass is a consulting firm dedicated to really helping both leaders and organizations fuel their workforce and maximize organizational performance. We specialize in taking complex talent, HR, and culture challenges and turning them into really actionable and clear strategies, going from talent strategy and talent planning to leadership development to strategic planning to compliance and engagement, really going all around the employee experience. And as I mentioned, I'm the Chief Talent Officer here at Compass. I lead the talent strategy and talent acquisition functions. My background and career has spanned agency, corporate in-house recruitment management, and now in the consulting space. I've been heavily focused in talent analytics and lean team management of talent teams. I fundamentally believe that metrics, KPIs, goals, and talent are so critical to creating talent teams and programs that can perform at peak in any organization. So I'm going to spend some time on this topic today.
Thanks, Sam. All right, and Katie, you're up next.
Great. Thanks, Krista. Hello, everyone. Hope that you're doing well. My name is Katie Lai. I'm the Director of Talent Acquisition at Pi Insurance. We're a Series D insurance tech company that is remote first, and we are helping small businesses with their insurance needs and making insurance easy as pie. I've been really fortunate to have a recruiting TA career spanning about 20 years. I'm here in Austin, Texas, but spent majority of my career over in Silicon Valley, where I had an opportunity to work for high-tech companies like Waymo and Amazon and Cisco, and then also have an executive recruiting background from Korn Ferry. I'm very excited to be here, and as Krista mentioned, I'm also one of the founding members for the Talent Collective Austin chapter. So if you might be in Austin, please do say hello. Thank you all.
Amazing. Well, thanks, Katie. And for those of you who are just joining us, again, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, put your LinkedIn profile. We always love using these as opportunities to connect with one another and just grow our networks. And wanted to also quickly point out that Pinpoint is going to be giving some giveaways. So if after this session you book a demo with them, you can either get a $50 gift card or a $50 credit towards a membership for Talent Collective if you're a woman in TA. So keep an eye on after the fact. We will send an email out to everybody that will have the recording of the session in case you have to hop off late. Or if you have to hop on late. And also we'll send out the links to all of our speakers' profiles so you can connect with them, and then also put that offer out there for everyone as well. So with that, we'd love to get to the meat and potatoes of why we're all here today, to learn more about data-driven recruiting and how we can really use this as career momentum for ourselves. So would love to start kind of at the foundation. So we'd love to hear from our panelists today. What do you think are the foundational pieces of good reporting? Sam, would love to start with you on this one.
Thanks, Krista. So I think before we talk about, some of the more technical pieces of reporting, I like to zoom out to the big picture of business alignment. And so at Compass, we fundamentally believe that culture starts with recruiting. Every decision, strat, and tactical that we make during the talent strategy lifecycle has a huge influence on key principles within the organization and business, right? And as soon as you start talking about growth in an organization, to me, that has an implication on the talent team, right? So I very closely link everything that we talk about in talent acquisition all the way back to our business strategy. And so when we talk about foundations of good reporting, for me, where I start there is understanding, do you have alignment on what you are measuring and what the business impact of those reporting tools and data points that you're giving are? And have you educated and aligned with your stakeholders on what those mean, right? You could be reporting on the most important talent acquisition metric for your organization, whether that's time to fill or source by pipeline or et cetera, et cetera. But do your key stakeholders understand what that means to the business? And have we educated and taken the time? The second piece that I think is really important when we talk about foundations of good reporting is about accountability of how we adapt those metrics if we are off track, right? We're talking to a lot of talent leaders. We've all felt at different times, right? The burden of what happens when we feel like we're not moving a requisition quickly enough, or something is sitting, or we can't fill a critical role. But how do we get to root cause analysis with our leaders to understand where problems can start, how big they are, and then what do we do globally to fix it? And so when we do report a metric that maybe doesn't look as green or on track as we would like it to be, that instead of it turning, adversarial, that we're collaborative and we're talking about how do we fix this together? And then the third piece of this is really about how are you giving your data to your stakeholders in a way that they can receive it in a cadence that makes sense. Is it graphic? Is it short narrative? Is it dashboarding? Can you do this in your systems? Do your key stakeholders have the right access? And again, is it in a way that they can understand and digest it? I've found in my experience with leaders that I work with, oftentimes my tools have exactly what I need for my dashboards. And I've had this recently. I had exactly what I needed to be able to show good reporting. I just needed to give them a link in their email to go click into the dashboard instead of recreating it, right? So what's accessible and how do they know how to find it and when should they find it? The last thing I'll say on good reporting foundations is around role alignment. This is where the RACI matrix, I think, comes into play really well. And for those of you who aren't familiar, right, who is actually responsible for the data? Who's accountable? Who do we consult? And then who is informed of what we're reporting? And so in your organization, that might look like your talent leader being responsible for that, but your recruiters or your sourcers or your talent acquisition specialists are accountable for the impact of that data. You have cross-functional or departmental stakeholders who you need to consult to make sure that this all weaves together, and your leadership team needs to be informed. And that's just one example, right? It doesn't always work like that. Like I said, I like to start at the business side before we dive into the technical pieces of that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much, Sam. And Katie, would love to hear from you as well.
Thank you. I think Sam covered a lot of it, so I'll try to add on a little bit of tidbits, but thank you, Sam, for that. One of the things that I look at as a TA leader, as I work with my teams that may be focused on technical or business or insurance recruiting, along with the different leaders that are aligned with them. As we know, it's, when we think about data, we think about, garbage in, garbage out. And that's a very popular term. And I think it really goes into more around what is the input of the data that we care about, and how do we make sure it's consistent across our teams? Because having that consistency will make sure that we can have that foundational reporting that Sam was just talking about. If we care about things like time to fill, time to hire, pass-through rates. So knowing what are the inputs is the number one step, I think, in good foundational reporting. Sam also touched on this as well, but knowing what sort of data is going to drive action. There is so much different data that we can be collecting, right? From representation goals to pass-through rates, OA rates, decline rates, source of hires. And so when you look at all of those different areas that you could report on, it's actually about what do you as either the leader, the recruiter, as a team care about, and then how does those metrics help drive action to help further your goals throughout the year. So I think choosing what's important and then going back to making sure the inputs are accurate and scalable for teams is really important. And then lastly, and I think this goes consistently throughout, we'll probably hear about this quite a lot in today's panel, is just really knowing your stakeholders. So the metrics that your first line hiring manager might care about around the health of their pipeline is going to be very different than maybe the CFO of your organization, and the cost per hire, the pace of hiring pace to goal, and what the end of the year is going to look like. So knowing that you have different stakeholders, I think will also help set up what the foundations of your reporting should look like through your organization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Katie, to your second point about, choosing what you're reporting on, it's going to look different to different organizations. And so why just choose what everyone else is doing, right? It depends on what your goals are, and, not just choosing metrics that are out of the box, but really specific to what you're the drive that you're trying to change that you're trying to drive in your organization. Tom, what about you? I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, look, I think we've had two great answers from Sam and Katie, so I'll try not to repeat the same stuff. I think with the sort of geeky lens, I think, yeah, just think about the tech stack, right? Like you've all got systems these days, hopefully. I think Sam talked about having exactly what she needed in her dashboards and systems and stuff. That's awesome. I think my experience speaking to folks on the ground is that's not always a luxury that people have. And I think like I would start by taking the great advice you've just had and think about like what can you actually get out of the systems and the tools and the processes and things you've got. Make a list of what you've got to work with, and also make a list of what you want and that's missing, and sort of put a bit of a plan in place to go plug that gap either manually or through another tool or something else. I'm not advocating you go rip and replace things. There's always sort of ways you can extract more value from the systems that you have. And I think, and then once you've kind of understood what that data picture is, think about how you can distribute it to people. I think if you're lucky to have super engaged leadership and stakeholders that want to go look at live dashboards, like in Sam's example, you're blessed and that's awesome, and you should take advantage of that. I think in my experience, certainly at larger companies, we try and make a lot of an effort to help TA get data out to their stakeholders proactively so that they're having to kind of have as low friction as possible when engaging with that. So I'd make that kind of geeky tech point. And then the other geeky tech point I'd make is sort of think about how you can leveraging benchmark data more. I think it's great to see your own reporting data. I think we really, really like to see folks look at their own data in contrast with competition, with market forces, with broader kind of bigger picture labor market data, because to points that have been made already, when you've got a metric that gets a bit squiffy or goes the wrong way, it's useful to have some kind of market context to support the narrative about why we're seeing that happen. And I think B, we can talk about reporting in the context of sort of evidencing our performance as a TA function, but I'm always interested in how are we doing relative to others in the market, right? And I think everybody hopefully recognizes that market volatility is really high. We're all having to adapt constantly. And I think don't make the mistake of looking at benchmark data from like 2020, because it tells just a completely different story to what we're all seeing on the ground today. And so go find those reliable sources of comparable benchmark data and make sure you're not just looking at your own stuff in isolation, but really kind of leveraging the wisdom of the crowds a bit.
Yeah, I wanted to I hate this word double click, but double click into one of the things that you said, Tom, because I think, reflecting on my own experience as a TA leader, the tools that we have, we oftentimes only scratch the surface of what they're capable of. And you were talking about like really fully utilizing the tools and resources that you have before going and trying to, acquire a bunch more. And one thing that has worked really well for me is going to your CSM, right? Going to the company and asking them like, how can I be utilizing this more? Let's, get into that QBR and meet with them on a quarterly basis so that you can really dig into the tools you have and learn how to utilize them fully, right? So I love that you mentioned that. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to our next question here. So, what problems have you experienced or seen when you don't have access to good reporting? Katie, would love to start with you on this one.
Thank you. Yeah, I was thinking about a bunch of different examples, but I won't bore everyone with everything that comes top of mind. But one example I was thinking about is the importance of being able to validate the data in your reports. At a previous company, I was reporting for my team about like an 80% offer acceptance rate. And our compensation team had access also to our applicant tracking system and was pulling reports that was saying we were, below 70% OA rate, which is obviously completely inaccurate of what I was reporting. But when we dug into the data, it turns out they were also including offers that were pending. So offers extended that hadn't reached a termination point, whether it be accepted or declined, which obviously then really impacts what that OA rate looks like. And so I think that's kind of a small example, but really important example about how, yes, the dashboards are really important and can be beautiful and easy access. And there are dashboards that I have that I fully appreciate. But if I'm unable to validate what is being shown to me, or to being able to dig deeper to making sure, again, the inputs are consistent, the way that we understand what we're reporting on is consistent, it could be very damaging, and it could really offset what the strategy and what the accomplishments of the team could look like. So for me, I think the validation of data is very critical in good reporting.
Yeah, are we all looking at the same thing and measuring the same thing? Okay, and Sam.
What Katie said really resonates with me, and kind of tagging on to that. What happens when you don't have access to good reporting is oftentimes the anecdotes can become truth, right? And for me as a talent leader, I am very rooted in, right, my objective data. What can I prove? What can I show? How can we show the impact of that short term, long term? And it can be really easy, right, for folks to say things within the organization when they feel that talent isn't moving fast enough, let's say, or maybe they don't have the same level of visibility that some of us do who are in it or day in and day out of. Talent's moving too slow. We aren't filling these recs fast enough, right? We're not being efficient or effective. And so without that good reporting package that allows us to proactively show kind of progress and status, those anecdotes can become truth, right? Perception is reality. And so that's dangerous. And I've always done a lot of work in my career to make sure that we don't fall into those pitfalls. The other thing, and Tom hit on it, is that without good access to reporting, one of the things that I've seen play out is that less than ideal decisions can be made on systems, whether we should keep them, whether we should renew them, whether we should change, and why, because maybe we're not sure what the impact is. And I've seen that play out a lot recently in terms of sourcing tools, right? Aggregating tools, things that we're bringing into the fold to help our talent teams run better, faster, stronger. If we're not able to show and produce what the ROI is on those things that we're bringing into our stack, decisions can be made that are averse to our TA teams when they're actually when these tools may be very beneficial. And then the other two pieces, right, kind of zooming back out, we don't have good data. We lead to gaps in strategic talent planning, which then give us potential gaps in TA team headcount planning in addition to organizational headcount planning. And we all know, right, generally speaking in TA, we're running pretty lean, especially in these market conditions. We don't want to operate leaner than we need to.
Yes, so true. Thank you. Thanks for that. Tom, was there anything you wanted to add on that one?
Yeah, I'll keep it brief. Again, two great answers that I kind of fully agree with. I think the stuff is like simply what gets measured gets managed, right? And I like without the data, you're just sort of shooting blind. I think like stepping back a bit, the sort of bigger macro comment I would make is like one of the things that got me excited about coming into the space was the idea that I just think TA is like wildly underappreciated and underutilized in most businesses. And I say that as someone who's guilty of doing that in the past, right? One of our kind of like underlying motivations at Pinpoint is to try and get the TA function a seat at the boardroom table, right? Like we think it's really important, and like, there's a lot of thematic conversation from everybody on this call about sort of TA shifting from a reactive to like a much more proactive function. I think the biggest risk to me of like not being able to utilize an evidence-based reporting is that you just look like you're speaking a different language to the other folks sat around that boardroom table. Like imagine a CFO or a CMO or a product person coming to a strategic conversation and not bringing data to validate their opinion, right? It's just unheard of. And what you've seen over the past 10, 15 years is the evolution of job titles and things like that. In all of those functions, you've got ops people and analysts and things like that underpinning most of the functions in our businesses today. If TA is the only folks coming to the table going, I kind of feel like this, and we think this might be true, you just look stupid, bluntly. And I think it's so important that you have a conversation using the same language at the same level as your other leadership peers. And so, yeah, like that's what I'd say.
Well, and on that point, I think advocating that you get rec ops people on your team and those analysts, because how else are we like, we have to basically self-teach ourselves how to run data and get reports, and we're not usually given analysts unless we're huge organizations, right?
For sure. Yeah, but that's why you've got to lean on your teams. And as you very well put earlier, Krista, like lean on your CSMs and lean on the folks within your vendors that should have experience and guidance and context for you, right? Like these systems are here and they're powerful. Use them. Obviously, if you can get an analyst, great. But like the reality is most folks aren't at a scale where that makes economic sense. And so you've got to become your own analyst.
Yeah. So on that note, Tom, the next question kind of ties really wonderfully into what you were just talking about. So what do you think the leadership team really wants to know from their talent function? And Tom, I'd love to start with you this time.
Yeah, honestly and bluntly, I would say that I think most leadership teams don't know what they want from their talent function, which is like a big part of the problem. Again, I just think talent as a function is just so criminally underutilized. All the CEOs in the world talk about how much they love and care about their people and how they are a business as a collection of wonderful people. But like actually, if you probe them on what that means and how they're leveraging that to differentiate in the market, like they'll all often struggle to find an answer. I think those kind of core and obvious quality metrics everybody defaults to are great, and people want to see those for certain. But I think what leadership teams really want is to kind of be taken by the hand and taken on a bit of a journey. And I think they want you to kind of actually bring some interesting perspective that's fresh to the table. I think the example I often use here is we work with a very large creative agency, like sort of 2,000-3,000 headcount, originally based in the UK. They've expanded all over the world, and they looked at a big expansion project expanding into South America. And their CFO and their kind of leadership team had chosen like 5 sites to potentially consider expanding their sort of South American HQ into. And they'd looked at flights and proximity to their other locations. They'd looked at the cost of office space. They'd looked at regional lease licensing, all that sort of stuff. What they hadn't looked at is the cost of talent and the availability of talent in those regions. It's a creative agency. They literally sell creative people for a business. That is it. And so they had a really forward-thinking CPO who had a very, very big hand in their talent function. And they basically took £50,000 at the time of their budget for the year, and they spent £10,000 each on 5 very targeted social outreach campaigns to get talent pipeline built in each of the cities. And they looked at the data about what the quality of that talent was, what the portfolio of their creative work was, what the salary expectations and availability was. And they overlaid that on top of the office location costs and all of the other kind of boring stuff that the rest of the business had worked on. And it was the complete opposite. And actually, they made a decision around expansion based solely on the availability of the talent, which was the right thing to do. But they hadn't even considered doing that unless somebody had just taken the initiative and done it. And from then on, the talent function was heralded and often consulted. But you sort of have to prove your worth before you get the opportunity to do it again, if that makes any sense. And so I think you just need to work out how to proactively bring something fresh to the table in terms of a perspective. And all of a sudden, people will start wanting a bit more of that.
That's such a great example. Sam, what about you?
I think when a lot of echoing what Tom has shared here, but what's really important when I think about this is back to the ROI, right? What works well and what is working? What is the business ROI of what we're doing? And I think Tom very eloquently talked about the fact that a lot of our leaders don't know what they want from TA, and I agree with that, right? And that's where I think this concept of being, whether you're the leader, whether you're a talent acquisition specialist or an individual contributor, the idea of the business partner is really important. How do you partner with your stakeholders? How do you speak their language, hear their pain points, and then proactively come back to the table and be able to explain what obstacles are costing the business potential revenue and come back with a solution of how do we mitigate them? Also being able to explain, are we getting the bang for our buck, right? In terms of the headcount, the infrastructure that we spend for. I've in the space that I work in, a lot of the clients in our space where we do like fractional outsourced talent acquisition are asking for, ROI of our work. And what are we giving them in return for filling this headcount? At what price point? And how is that benefiting the business? And what revenue can that drive long term? And then to the last point that Tom made, what are the themes and trends that we need to be prepared for proactively in our market, right? What's coming? Are we seeing a shortage of new talent coming into the market? I'm originally from and live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We are a big campus town, right? There are a lot of colleges and universities that have a huge talent pool. And about 5 years ago, a lot of that talent was leaving immediately after they got their degrees. How did that impact my key stakeholders and my key organizations, right? And what did we need to be prepared for as an organization who really wanted that talent in that example, right? And so being able to not just look around the talent space, but then what are your markets telling you? What are the trends telling you? And what are the ideas that we come back to be able to have those conversations really meaningfully?
And where are we getting that market data too? Is it ChatGPT? Thank you, Sam. Katie, anything to add to that?
I'll just add a little bit. I think that I'm sure everybody hearing Tom and Sam speak all really resonates with everyone here, as well as with me. One thing that was coming to mind as they were talking is that looking at past data is really important and bringing that to the table. Yes, when you have your executive leadership team in a room together to be able to present, yes, we already hired the people at target, or maybe we're a little bit behind. That's really nice and everything. But what we're really trying to determine is, where is our future with knowing this data, right? And I think that where it comes down to it, similar to Sam talking about ROI, it is about linking our hiring to the business OKRs. And sometimes it's really obvious if you work for a product company that you need to have, this body in seat by this date in order to achieve, this product release. Those type of relationships with OKRs is extremely important to show that we're not just hiring bodies for the sake of, onboarding new people and seeing what could happen. These new hires, these new employees are part of the business and being able to achieve our OKRs. And so that past reporting is actually more of a so what on what does our future look like for our reporting, just as Tom and Sam said. It is about looking back to be able to say, hey, here are the headwinds we may be experiencing in the next, we're now in Q4, everybody, right? So what might prevent us from reaching that end of year goal? Or maybe we're going to be ahead, and how does that impact the OKRs the business might be looking at for 2026? So I think the linkage to the OKRs is really important. And then also being able to say the so what about the data to look into the future.
Yeah, thank you. That's amazing. Some great points there. We're about halfway through here. Just wanted to remind everyone, if you have any questions for our panelists, please stick those into the chat and we'll get to those, especially as we see them and as it makes sense to incorporate those into the conversation. And also feel free to, again, introduce yourself, put your name, your LinkedIn, where you're calling from in the chat, and so that we can all connect with one another. So this next question is definitely building on the last one about what your leadership is really looking for from talent acquisition, and would love to now kind of talk a little bit more about influence. So how can your data and reporting show your influence as the best TA partner? Tom, do you want to start off on this one?
Sure. Yeah, I think one of the things that one of the criticisms that I often hear of TA folks is that they're very good at using reporting to sort of evidence their own presence or their own work, right? Like, here's how we've moved the needle on time to fill or time to hire or cost, whatever. It doesn't really matter what the metric is. I think that's great, and we should do that. But I think the criticism I get from leadership is, but they haven't actually translated why that matters to me and how that impacts the business decision we're going to make. And I think sometimes we overestimate the ability of our leadership team without context to translate our metrics as a function into stuff that helps them do their jobs better, differently, and otherwise. So I think I'd start by just saying, learn to do that translation and speak leadership's language. And I spend typically more time than we see TA folks do trying to learn more about the commercial inputs and outputs of all of the other functions in the business. I think you understand the role profiles and the talent personas intimately, and that's fantastic. But sometimes there's like another layer above that we can really add value to if we get the chance to understand. It's kind of back to that business partnering stuff we talked about earlier. I think that the second thing is, like, how do we bring both good and bad news to the leadership team armed with data, right? If stuff's not going well, flag that early rather than late, so we give people the chance to alter things. And equally, kind of comes back to the point I made right at the outset of the conversation. What external data and insights can we be bringing to the table that our leaders are unlikely to be consuming that might help us forecast a problem down the road in the future, right? Are we looking at labor market insights data? Are we looking at benchmarking data? Are we looking at things that say, hey, you're telling me you want me to hire 1,000 heads in this area in the next 12 months? We don't think the demand is there for that. We need to shift from demand capture to demand generation, and we need an employer brand budget today to go create that capture demand for the future, right? I think a lot of the industries we're seeing and that we work with, especially in the high volume space, are having this huge volatility in demand for their roles. And I think that's often not understood well enough by leadership. And so I think, how can we just take the data we've got, not just sort of give them reporting that makes sense to us, but translate it into outcomes? I think B, how can we make sure we're leveraging as much external insight as possible? And then C, what more can we be doing to sort of take folks on a journey and really get that kind of strategic buy-in from the TA function?
Thank you. Katie, Sam, anything to add there?
So when I'm consulting with my clients who are building out talent teams, this one of the places that I take them through, first recommendation for almost every one of those folks that are building, is to look at a pyramid structure of data, which I think maps very closely to what Tom is talking about in terms of how does it map to the business, right? For me, if you look at that pyramid, the top are the company goals or OKRs. They sit on top, they inform everything else that we're going to do. And it's important that I think leaders understand and the talent leaders are able to communicate that everything that we do from a talent perspective, we understand influences this top line, right? And without this top line OKR or goal setting that the company has done, these things live in a vacuum. And so that's the top of the pyramid, right? What's up here? What's the company's goal? Is it to grow X millions of revenue? Is it to grow X headcount? Is it to grow market share, create a new market, go to exit, what have you, right? That sits at top. And then kind of dropping down into one of the quadrants of the pyramid below that, then it's the KPIs. How can your talent team perform to get to those OKRs and company goals? What do they have to be able to deliver in terms of hires, in terms of volume, in terms of numbers of pipeline, in terms of diversity of what have you, right? What does that truly look like? And then what are you willing to say, hey, we're going to commit to this to get to our company goals? And then the third, and I think can often be overlooked piece for, again, when you look at talent as a function of quantity, not quality. But the third piece in that pyramid that I always want my clients to implement is this concept of quality scores, meaning how effective are we actually at identifying our candidates and our conversion rates? And when you're implementing that type of metric, it can remove a lot of common questions like, what does the pipeline look like? How many candidates do we have? What's different between yesterday and today? And I hope that, right, like some of you are chuckling's maybe the wrong word, but I'm sure you've heard this. I'm sure you can join along with me and jest there. I've heard that a lot of times. And then it turns the conversation towards quality of efforts and also then gives your talent team the ability to really create a candidate experience, source from the appropriate places, and like flex their craft expertise muscles and show their true value to the organization, right? And it gets us away from saying, well, did you interview 20 candidates this week? Maybe not. Maybe I only interviewed 4, but 3 of them are great because I focused my resources in a place where it made sense. And so for me, when we're able to show that type of pyramid matrix, again, kind of my baseline example, now we're having a conversation that everything that we do there roots all the way back to the core company goals, the core OKRs, and the business objectives. Now we're playing on the same team, right? We're integrating talent to the business strategy. And I think that when you can come from that position, collaboration's a lot easier.
Yeah, so true. Katie, anything else to add there?
Yeah, I'll just add a little tidbit that we've talked about a little bit earlier, but I think it's important to reemphasize. The data and the reporting and the foundations of reporting are all so very important, as we've talked about. But as you're thinking about the different stakeholders in your organization at different levels and different roles, it is important to use the data to tell a story that's relevant to them. And I think what's really important, that I advise my teams as well, is that we're never sending a spreadsheet of data over to anybody for them to try to figure out how to analyze it, right? Because they're not talent experts and they're looking at a bunch of data and you think, oh, it looks so obvious, right? I'm showing them all the numbers and of course they can figure it out because they have their own analytical mind. But the reality is that we are using that data to tell a story that is compelling and relevant to what the needs are. We talked a little bit about whether that be a story about the resources we need. Do we need more recruiters? Do we need sourcers, coordinators, maybe a talent ops professional? So there might be ways to show that from an inefficiency standpoint, or how recruiters might be spending more time on programs as opposed to strategic recruiting. Or if you're going into a hiring leader meeting with just a bunch of data of the number of reach outs that you made, well, kind of what Tom was saying earlier, if you don't have any industry benchmarks to compare it to, is 30% response rate LinkedIn messages, is that good or bad? I don't know, right? So I think that taking the data and being able to create a story to bring along your stakeholders on where you're trying to help them get to is going to be really critical on having that seat in the table, no matter what type of role you have in the TA team.
Yeah, so true. And to your point about not just showing them a spreadsheet, right?
Yeah.
I think the reverse is true too. And Tom pointed on this earlier about like not just using anecdotal data or I feel like such and such is true. There has to be kind of this middle ground balance of you can use the real data to tell a story and then use anecdotal stories or data that you've heard, but not leading with the anecdotal part, I think is really important.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Would love, again, just one last plug for any questions in the chat. I have a couple other questions for the panel. So what do you do? And I've had this happen before in previous organizations that I've worked for. What do you do if your leadership team is not built in to being data centric? I had a leader that I worked for a very long time, who like really wanted to be data centric, and she knew it was the right thing to do, but at the end of the day, it was always about gut feeling and, you know, the kind of that gut approach. So what do you do in those situations? How do you handle that? And how do you still bring in data, and how do you handle those conversations?
I guess
I
it's. Oh,
go on,
go ahead.
Katie. I couldn't possibly after you.
Okay. I think that Krista, well, I haven't met a leader who doesn't want data, so that's one surprising to me. Usually it's more like, I need more data. But I do think it's important, like we manage all of our stakeholder relationships of meeting them where they're at, right? And being able to build upon that as your relationship grows. Because essentially that if you're forcing someone to look at the data or try to consume information that is not meaningful to them, that is not going to be helping your influencing skills. So I think the influencing piece about meeting them where they're at, making sure that you're building upon that story is going to be pretty critical.
Thank you. Tom, you were gonna share something?
Yeah, I was going to give like a much more trite answer and just say like it's 2025. Like if you're working for a TA leader who doesn't care about data or isn't making data-driven decisions, go find a new job. And like it sucks to say it, but like unfortunately, I think you're just like hamstringing your career and your own progression if you're not working underneath somebody who really, really cares about this stuff and is kind of driving that narrative through the business, because there's so many kind of second order ramifications of the TA leadership not caring about this stuff. Not least, they aren't going to be the proactive TA partner that the business needs them to be in 2025. And I think you're then going to miss some of the thought cycle of access to that. And so I know it's a bit defeatist, but yeah, I haven't seen a great example of TA leaders who don't like data suddenly deciding to like it. So I'd go find one who does.
True.
I think a little bit deeper on that too, right? Of is it they don't like data? This I think is some root cause analysis. Is it they don't like data, or they don't understand the tools, or the format doesn't make sense to them, or they're afraid to ask questions because there's some information that they feel like others around them all understand and they don't. I've found often in those types of situations where it feels as if one of my leaders doesn't want the data, it's often because of something else at the root. And I think when you build those business partnerships and you build trust and collaboration, it allows you to get to the why behind that, and then how do we get to a place where we can mutually partner together. And I agree with Tom. Yeah, it is 2025, and if we're not armed with data as TA leaders, we are probably falling behind.
I guess I had an experience that isn't the norm these days, so hopefully most people aren't dealing with that. And then I have one more question that I love to also ask before we wrap up here today. So if your ATS isn't able to provide strong enough data, or if you haven't even implemented an ATS yet, are there any other good ways to get quality data? And anyone can take it away on this one.
I run an ATS, so bias aside. So look, Pinpoint we love and are very proud of. There are hundreds of ATSs. If you've got an ATS in place and they aren't giving you the reporting that you want, again, find a new ATS, like the advice on finding a new boss in the prior answer. I think what I would say is there's lots of different degrees of maturity around all this stuff, right? And there's lots of systems who can do some, but not all of those things. There's also lots of really great, what we would call point solutions. So if you've got like a legacy system and that plugs into lots of other infrastructure with your business and it's just not feasible to change, I think about what you can introduce on top of those things, often at very little cost, that drives improvement in some element, often the candidate experience, and B, can really meaningfully generate some data you can actually work with. So like the first example that comes to mind, because it's often quite low friction to implement, is something like interview transcription or some sort of interview annotation tool. And I think a lot of folks look at those tools and what they see is, this is great because I don't need to write anything down anymore and it can complete my scorecard for. That is true and that is brilliant. But I think folks often miss the sort of second order value of that, which is you then now have this huge database of everything that's been said backwards and forwards in your interviews. And what we'll often encourage our clients to do is use that data for two things. One, benchmarking. So you can now see, well, what were the salary expectations of all of the folks that we spoke to for this role, and how did that evolve over a period of time? And those tools will help you do that, completely agnostic of your ATS often. And then the other thing is, when I've talked a few times and been quite boring and repeated the same stuff, which is like, bring some proactive insights to your leadership team, we have some great examples of clients of ours bringing interview transcription notes that have competitor information in them to their leadership team. Hey, I spoke to Sam. She's interviewing for this role. She currently works at competitor A. She said this was going on and she's interested in leaving because and like you can get these systems to generate insights that are really valuable to your product team or to your marketing team or to your sales team. Like go do that and use them. And so it's an isolated example, but there's often things you can layer onto your existing tools that don't require like a complete replace.
Love that. That's great. Sam or Katie?
I think when you like, I'm going to take the angle of right, and many of my clients are, on the smaller side, maybe in the nonprofit space, are not going towards, the full tilt ATS yet. And this is where I encourage folks to wrangle your resources, right? I've implemented solutions that look like, hey, look, I need you to fill out a Google form that feeds into an Excel file that now we can turn into a Power BI dashboard that gives us at least some intelligent reporting, right? Baseline, but being able to get even some content that starts to allow you to accumulate historical data so that, right, in the hopes of you are someday at a point where you are integrating, some really good systems and tools, and you do have, back to Tom's point, right, some benchmarking or some baseline data to say, okay, we were here, now we're here, now we're going to use the tools to our advantage to do this and automate some of those things instead of making them manual. And let me be clear, I'm not a proponent of adding manual work for manual sake. If there are ways for you to collect some data to, as your business grows, inform how you make these decisions, it may not always be pretty, but there are options.
Zapier. Zapier is one of those options. It's often free. They have a basic free account and you can create all sorts of zaps that'll automate things. So Katie, any additional thoughts? And we do have one question in the chat that we'll get to after that.
Yeah, I was actually going to say we can go to Caroline's question because I think that's a great question. I'd love to start off with an answer if that works.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, so I'll read it just real quick. So Caroline, thank you for presenting your question in the chat here. So any learning tips for recruiters aiming to better their data analysis skill set? Curious, any best practices, tools, or systems that come to mind? So Katie, yeah, take it away.
Yeah. Such a great question, and I love the curiosity. So I think the first and foremost, as I mentor and build teams, is advising to make sure that you have a command over your own ecosystem. So in today's discussion, we've talked a little bit more about at executive level or having a seat at the boardroom, but that is also really important when it comes to recruiters, sourcers, and individual contributors overall. So I think you start with the data that you have access to and matters to your day-to-day, whether it be the LinkedIn messages, response rate, looking at what the industry comparisons are, looking at your pass-through rate. So the access that you have already to your day-to-day is really important there. And then if you want to continue to build that, I think it is about tapping people, whether it be your network or in your company, that have that skill set. So I will say I'm probably a little bit fortunate, but most companies I've been at, a finance business partner, a finance analyst is always very willing to spend a little bit of time with me on a spreadsheet or kind of thinking through how to build something up on an Excel document. So I think that's one thing that you could leverage your resources just as like a quick, like, hey, do you have 15 minutes? The last piece I will say, and here at Pi, we have an enterprise Claude AI account, is that I will put in spreadsheets and data and talk to Claude about what are the other pieces about the analysis that I might be missing in all of this. So we're living in an age where we have access to AI and they can really be an interesting thought partner and ways to kind of go back and forth to see if there's areas of blind spots in the data that you're looking at.
Katie, I loved your idea about partnering with someone in finance and just asking them for a quick 15 minutes. In the startup that I worked at, I partnered really closely with our head of finance, and a lot of it was because I didn't come from organizations that use data, because my old boss was not a data person. And I think that alone, like me going to him asking for advice and how would you put this together, and little 15 minutes here and there wasn't a big time suck for him, but he really appreciated that, like me wanting to partner with him. And by the time I left that organization, he was so bummed because he's like, you're the first TA person that like I felt like I had a really good partnership with, and like we collaborated so well because I had gone to him just for help a couple of times, right? So it was almost like building that rapport with him and that partnership with finance that I think sometimes we overlook. So I think that's such a great pointer. Thank you.
Katie, I'm really glad that we did not get the whole way through this webinar without talking about AI. So thank you for going that direction. And I add on to that, right? I think that's such a great resource, right? You have a proprietary, or an in-house tool that you can do that. I think that's amazing for folks who have access to that. I think that's an amazing resource for talent acquisition professionals to really hone your craft and understand what the data is telling you and ask some vulnerable questions, right? In a safe space where you're able to kind of troubleshoot through some things that maybe you don't feel comfortable saying out loud in a broader group. My one call out to that is if you don't have something, right, internal, proprietary, you do have options to free tools, whether you're using, the basics of a ChatGPT or a Gemini. My call out, I earlier in my career came from a cybersecurity background, is to please make sure to sensitize that data for anything proprietary, because once you put it out into the universe, it is now in the universe and it's open source. But the same thing applies, right? When you're going through those conversations of what's the data telling me, right? Sensitize it down without any information that makes it, tied back to something. But hey, I have pipeline data that looks like this. I have source data that looks like this. I have brand data that looks like this. What's this telling me? Ask some questions, poke around, look at the options, and think outside the box.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is tying into another question that we have in the chat here. And Tom, you might want to also answer both. But benchmark data, right? We touched on that earlier, having difficulty finding that benchmark data. Where do you find it? Are there any suggestions on getting reputable benchmark data?
Yeah, I think benchmark data is very heavily dependent on the industry and the location that you're recruiting in, right? And the depth of that data will vary kind of market to market. I think we see folks doing everything from using like big high level census labor market data and employment payrolls and things like that to tell a story about how available talent is. We have lots of folks working with industry bureaus and things like that, getting like top level insights into industry demand and appetite, especially in sectors like construction, where sometimes demand fluctuates a lot. We actually produce our own insights. We share them with our customers. We have some version of that available for free. I've just put a link in the chat there. You can go use that. It's like a subset of some of the data that we're allowed to share. Obviously, it's completely anonymized across our clients. And you can go in there and choose an industry, and it will show you kind of quarter on quarter insights for your industry, for your organizational scale, based on what we're seeing in the marketplace. And so something like that's often useful. I think happy to dig into specifics around certain industries or org sizes, but sort of what you use is very heavily dependent on what you're in. And I think the overarching comment I would make again is just that I think lots of folks think everybody has the same problem, but actually different industries have markedly different problems. And I think half of our clients are constantly hounding us, asking us for how do we create more demand for candidates in the current climate. And the other half are saying, I've got 10,000 candidates for every role. How do I get rid of them all? And so making sure you're using the right stuff for you is important. And yeah, happy to drill into all of that as it applies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Sam or Katie, any ideas on where to get good benchmark data that's reputable?
I'm definitely going to look at Tom's Pinpoint benchmark data because that's very exciting to hear. And I would actually say most ATS, CRMs, sourcing vendors all publish something. So if you have your couple of favorites, you do a quick Google search, and usually it's like a 2024. It's usually maybe a year or two out. So that's something to think about. But that's typically how I just go start digging into Google. And then again, Claude is great on this to help you determine if there's some references and links as well. Claude will give you some hallucinations, so please be mindful of that. But there could be some gems in there as well.
I saw a video yesterday on that. I think it was like a YouTube about the hallucinations, and like always if you're asking an AI for data, go deeper, like cite the source. And sometimes it'll say like, I actually don't have a source for that. And then, you know, like keep going deeper and asking more and more questions, because you can just fact check it right then and there. And this will probably be the last question we can get to, but there's a question in the chat for Tom. So this goes back to what you were talking about interviewing someone from a competitor. How do you respect confidentiality? We typically have competitors sign an NDA, as they may learn information about us that's confidential. So how do you handle the reciprocal confidentiality? If we ask the candidate to be confidential, do we owe the same to them?
Sure, yeah, of course you do, is the answer. I think like all I would say is that example is a great example where you shouldn't be taking those notes, leveraging them into an insight, and then sharing that information widely across the business. That said, I think this is probably in reference to the earlier example I gave about sharing interview notes. There are hundreds and hundreds of examples where we're not talking about super mission critical, confidential NDA information. Oh, I'm recruiting fast food workers and I keep getting applicants from the KFC location down the road because they were all just told that site is closing in 1 month. Maybe we can do some targeted advertising into that pool because we know that the pass-through rate is going to be higher there, or we're seeing this change. I've just been told that there's cuts coming in this function. You know, like what we're not talking about is this secret project that my competitor is working on is going to be openly discussed in a forum where that's inappropriate. I think what we're talking about is where are we seeing patterns in folks that we're speaking to, and how do we leverage those patterns to drive behaviors in other areas of the business, not just recruitment. But absolutely agree, Mark. If you're asking a candidate to sign an NDA, you should be treating the information you take from them in exactly the same way you would expect them to.
Yeah, I think that's almost those examples that you just gave, Tom, are like market data almost, you know, they're like live market data that you're hearing from someone. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. We're getting close to time. Want to thank you all for being here today. Another huge thank you to our speakers today, Katie, Sam, and Tom, and to Pinpoint for sponsoring today's session. So we will be sending out an email again after this. There's going to be an offer in there from Pinpoint. So if you book a demo with Pinpoint, you can either get a $50 gift card or even $50 towards a Talent Collective membership if you're a woman in TA. So please look out for that email from me. It'll also have the recording and everyone's LinkedIn from the speakers today. And then for Talent Collective, keep an eye on our LinkedIn page. We also have a newsletter we send out that has all of our events, so both in person and virtual. We have some other really great topics coming up, virtual events, how to choose the right HR tech, what to do with fake candidates. So those are all coming up in the next couple of months. And I hope everyone has a good rest of your Thursday, wherever you are in the world. And thanks again for joining us today. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.